Hey everybody, Jessica Henry Gray here. I'm happy to be back. I know it's been a little bit of a while here that I was gone. Had a really great summer. We did several workshops. I'm excited to introduce today's video to you. This is a beautiful scene from Monet's pond in Giverny. I was there this last summer and you're not allowed to paint on the ground, so I got some stunning photographs and I'm going to share my view of Monet's pond with you today. First I want to tell you, we had our workshops in France, and Ireland, and also Oregon this summer. So I have been very busy and I've missed you guys, so I'm happy to be back. And I do plan on doing some more videos here now in the future. And so anyway, excited to share with you about France. We will be going back. That is going to be my last workshop. I'm not doing workshops anymore unless they're like right here in Ohio. But anyway, I have France and we are taking reservations. We're about half full, so there's more information down below about that. So I'm not going to fill your ears with that. But I do want to tell you about a very exciting new thing that I am doing. And there's going to be a lot more information at the end of this video. So please stay tuned to the end and watch it. I think you're going to be thrilled. I am now part of Epiphany Fine Art. And that is a platform a little bit like Patreon, only better. We have a monthly subscription. I am going to be offering classes, videos on there with everything I can do. Like you'll have drawing, watercolor, portrait, plein air, of course, working from photos, learning composition, all kinds of stuff on that, painting the narrative portrait, master copies, and so on and so forth. A lot of you have asked for it, and I'm finally able to give this to you. So check out the links below, watch the video at the end of this video on Monet's pond, and I will see you on the other side of this intro.
Last summer, I had the very special opportunity to visit Giverny in France, just 30 minutes northwest out of Paris. And I got to tour Monet's beautiful homes and gardens. These were just some of the gorgeous flowers on display at his home. I'm working on a children's book, and so it was important to me that since it takes place in Giverny, that I actually visit. So today I'm going to demonstrate painting because you're not allowed to paint on site. You can do some sketches, but so I wanted to paint this beautiful lily pond that he was so famous for, including the bridge. Monet himself had painted this pond many times. He did make it, had it made for him. And this is him in his studio, one of his studios. So let's jump in and paint this lily pond. So I have some extra colors on my palette. I will show you. I have titanium white, cad red medium, cad yellow light, cadmium yellow lemon, cad yellow deep, yellow ochre, burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, Windsor blue, alizarin permanent, emerald green, phthalo green, Prussian green, magenta, quinacridone red, and permanent rose. And sometimes I do like to use some of those extra colors when I'm just playing with some different flowers and things. I have my little can of odorless mineral spirits. I'm right next to my window that's open. I've got my linseed oil and a large 2-inch brush. This is a 16 by 20 canvas. I have put a coat of oil primer on it. It was an older painting and I like the texture that shows through. So I'm going to tone the canvas with a little bit of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna and some thinner. And I'm going to just put this on loosely. There is some yellow ochre in there as well. And I do apologize for the glare, but I don't think it affects this video too much. So just putting a coat of this odorless mineral spirits on the canvas. And I'm working that on a little darker than I need because I'm going to rub it off. You can see from the glare that there is a surface of that thinner on my canvas. And I don't want that there because if I were to just paint directly on that, it would do two things that are bad. My paint would slip around way too much. And then also it would dry and create a layer of mostly dust that when you try to paint over that, you'd have adhesion problems through the layers. So you want to wipe that off, nice and well done. So now I'm taking just sort of a thinned down mixture of sienna and blue, and I'm blocking in according to my reference picture here of Monet's pond. And it feels such an honor to be able to paint his pond. I'm absolutely thrilled to do this, and I hope that you are excited to watch this video because it meant a lot to be there and to just kind of sit and absorb where he was, and he sat there too and painted this scene. And it's interesting too, you can get a group of about a dozen artists all around an area working on a project, and everybody sees it through a different lens. So while I'm not trying to be Monet, I am sort of drawing on a little bit more of an impressionistic flavor in this painting. So the first thing I do, of course, is block in my composition. And you can see on my palette down in the lower left-hand corner that there's really not a lot of interesting color mixing going on at this point. I am conscious of my values as I block in my composition. And it's not a matter of just simply copying the photograph as I see it. Photographs can distort. I find that there's three major problems with working from photos. The values get either too dark or too washed out, as well as your photo distortion. The things up close can be too rounded and curved. And then, of course, you've got color problems as well. So those are the three major issues that you have to keep in the front of your mind when you are working from photos. Just know that you are going to have to make some conscious decisions on your values. So everything up close to me, if it's dark, it's going to be a nice strong dark, and everything further back, I can look in the back and see a strong dark, but I have to keep it in my mind not to paint it as dark as I see it in the photo, because our brains, when looking at a painting, cannot separate if the values way in the background are just as strong and contrasting as they are up front. Then we don't have that ability to accept that that is further back. So you have to make that decision to lighten those darks in the background. And logically, it makes sense because there's a lot more atmosphere between us and the background. So just a lighter, a little bit more sky blue added to those darks back there. So as you can see here, even though I'm blocking in the values and massing in the bulk of where my colors and values are going to go, I'm still incorporating some of the different greens that I can anticipate I'll be needing. This is just sort of a preliminary layer as I'm blocking in. Still just using a small brush because I think of it sort of like a pencil, sort of a sculptor's tool. As I'm making plans and rearranging and wiping off on the canvas, I can just sort of manipulate where I need to go with my masses and the structure of the objects and the trees. So the very simple at this point, this is just ultramarine blue, a little bit of phthalo blue. For those of you who have been watching my videos for a long time, you'll know that I have just recently added phthalo blue to my list of colors that I typically paint with, especially in the studio when I don't have to lug around a lot of art materials. I don't mind throwing a few extra colors on my palette. So phthalo blue is a very warm color, and I like it as the sky goes down towards the horizon and it gets a little bit warmer, and it's less of the periwinkle blue that you see directly above you. So as the sky goes down, you see a lighter turquoise. So as I'm working on the water, I reverse that down toward the horizon. The water is a little bit more of that phthalo blue and kind of turquoise, and as it gets closer to us, I'm adding more of the burnt sienna, some alizarin, which are both in red families, and as I mix it with the blues, it turns to a grayish violet. And you can see even in the photo, that is just a lovely effect on the surface of the water, just that depth and the shadow created by that darker illusion as the water comes at us. And then gently, without using kind of a broom sweep technique, you don't want to sweep your brush strokes, even though you can look at that water and see it smooth. I like to think of the paint being applied in little chunky pieces of paint. And then you go back to your palette, you mix up another color, or you scoop up part of your batch that you mixed and apply it. And as I sort of channel that impressionist flavor, they never blended. They always just laid down pieces of color next to pieces of color. And I concentrate that effort on the sky as well. What I see in the photo too are contrails created by jets. And as I try to create art that has a timeless flavor, I don't want contrails in my sky. And I think I do start painting those as I see them because everybody gets stuck kind of just working on what they see from the photo. So after a little bit, I realize I take those out. I don't like them. The clouds at the top of the photo, I do like. I think that they have an interesting sort of flavor to the texture and the way that they are. So I add some of those. In the meantime, here you can see I'm working on creating a dome-like effect of the sky. So even though when you're out there sometimes and you're painting from life, you may not see very much of that periwinkle blue when you look out at the horizon, I still kind of sneak a little bit in because it still suggests that the sky up above is almost violet. So over here, I'm working on just some of these darker values and putting those in place. I notice as I'm working too that I didn't want the shadows to be black. You have to be very careful to not push them too dark when you're working because we do know that what is up close to us is going to be your darkest dark. It's important to make sure that you add some air into those shadows. So sometimes it helps to put something next to your easel that is just coal black, and you can use that as a gauge. Okay, that is the blackest. I don't want to get that dark. So I want to make it a little bit lighter than that, even in my shadows. A little bit air, a little atmosphere. It feels like life is circulating in there. Now it is sunrise at Monet's pond, and so the light was hitting these taller trees and just moving its way down the trunk of the trees. One of the most beautiful things I think in painting from life is the observation of movement of light. Whether you're painting still lifes or a portrait or especially a landscape here, movement of light to me is the most evocative thing to capture in a painting. Watch and observe in nature how light hits an object. It'll move across a surface. The further away from the source it gets, the softer and more shadowy it becomes. So in these trees, the tops of the trees are closer to the source, and as the light gently cascades down the tree, it gets cooler and darker. So now I'm just mixing up some of the cadmium yellows as I work in a little bit more of the greens into the reflections. Everything down in the water that you paint, whatever it's being reflected as, is going to be a little bit darker in the water than it is in reality. So I'm taking a little bit of the different greens. I've got some emerald green and phthalo green into the blues, a little bit of ultramarine blue to get some of these beautiful shady greens in the grass. Be careful when you have greens on your palette. The temptation is just to take the green and paint with it, but that gives you a very artificial shade of green. You don't want to do that. If you do put greens on your palette, use them for mixing with other colors or to neutralize your reds, but you don't want to just use them straight out of the tube because it can create a very fakey effect. I'm telling you, as one who loves painting greens, don't do that. You can get gorgeous shades from your blues, your yellows, your yellow ochre. Try yellow ochre with emerald green and see what you get. Emerald green with ultramarine blue and cad yellow. I like for my bright spring greens, some phthalo green with a little bit of phthalo green with cadmium yellow will give you that sunlit green effect. Now I've taken a smaller brush here in this part of the painting and I'm sort of blending, but by adding more paint. So I'm adding little dabs of paint as I see the overall background of the sky sort of cascading down toward the horizon and getting a little bit cooler, lighter, little almost yellowy toward the horizon. Smaller brush strokes, and yeah, that's what you don't see on canvas or on camera is how often I'm wiping my brush off. So I'm very careful all the time to make sure that as I work on creating this effect that my brush is as clean as possible. Just a wipe is all you need. You don't have to go and wash it off every now and then. Now here's a perfect point in case where those background trees you can see on my reference photo are every bit as dark and vibrant green as the trees up front. I am creating distance and atmosphere by purposely making them a little bit cooler and lighter as they're further back. So that's a little bit of white added to my greens will cool it down and push it further back. Sometimes you can add a little bluish tone to that. And now I'm starting to put in my anchors for the values in the distance. How dark do I want those shadows back there? I'm also working in blocking in some of the interesting colors that I see in the background. Some of those burgundy shade trees are just lovely, and I did want to use those to help frame and isolate some of the trees in front of them. All of these effects create the illusion of distance and layering of foliage, which of course Monet had such a variety of trees and plants on his entire property that it would seem appropriate to add all these beautiful colors. A little bit of that magenta into the whites and yellows to create some of those more rosy bushes that I saw sort of peeking through. It just adds a visual interest, and I knew that the focal area of this painting is going to be that area back there because his bridge is going to be back there. As you walk around the pond, there's two bridges. I was standing on a bridge, one of the smaller ones, taking this photo, and then the actual bridge that he painted all the time is further back there in the painting where you can see that I'm focusing on. Now that tree over there, this was end of June. In June, some of the buds were still coming out on some of these trees, so they had sort of an early, almost late spring flavor to the trees. And there's that rose color to that tree back there that I felt was important to get. It's just such a lovely color. And because this area is a focal point, I'm starting to put in some of the brighter lights because I need these as a gauge to help me direct my perspective on everything else in the painting. So if that brilliant green is focused right in the center, then I can stair-step myself backwards from there. If that's the brightest and most vibrant passage, then I need to make decisions, and I need to make these other areas not quite as screaming for attention as the ones up in the focal area. Now I'm taking that sky color and putting it in as little sky holes where I want them. And I can just put them down as random shapes, abstract shapes, because I can build around these sky holes a little bit more foliage to just sort of clarify and define the shape a bit more. And carving out some of the shape around toward the top too. I don't want to make the sky holes too much of a thing where it looks cookie cutter. So I'm trying to be conscious of the edges of my sky holes as being a little bit softer so that they feel like they're a natural part of the tree and the sky. And so I'm just taking that feature now and going throughout the rest of my painting and putting those in as I see it's appropriate. I wanted to take this moment while I'm working on some parts of this painting that are a little bit self-explanatory, just to tell you about my Epiphany page. The Epiphany is sort of like Patreon, only much better, much easier to use, and I have videos up there. It is a membership-based program. Very excited about it. I've got 34 videos up there right now, and every month I will be putting up 2 new videos. For members, there's an opportunity to be part of a live monthly question and answer session. And everything that I feel that the artist needs to create a well-balanced, well-rounded art education, I am focusing on my Epiphany page. So foundational drawing, classical drawing, portraits, still life, oil paint, Victorian watercolor. I've got animals and, of course, plein air and landscape, all of that. Narrative paintings. I have incredible stuff planned that I'm still going to do and I'm excited about adding. So check out those links. I'm going to put a link up above here and a link down below. I do hope you look into it because I think that a lot of the people who watch my channel, watch my videos, are excited about furthering their art education. And for many of you who have wanted to take workshops, as far as France 2023 goes, that's my last workshop I'm doing. I won't be doing any more. I'm going to be focusing on my Epiphany page and some other projects I have going on. So if you've been wanting more education, this is it. I'm so excited to offer this, and I think you're going to enjoy checking those links out. All right, so getting back into some of this detail now, I'm excited to work on the bridge. So zooming in, that bridge was such a beautiful, unique emerald green color. And I've got my maul stick. So it's actually an old bamboo cane hooked over my easel that I'm resting my hand on. And I'm going through and blocking in the shape of the bridge. And then I came back through with a darker color and put in the dark squares that, by being a negative space, painted the railings of the bridge. So now the bridge had a canopy of wisteria over the top that was no longer blooming, but the wisteria was still there, and that's creating that archway over the top. So I want to it was difficult to try to clarify that this is the bridge, so I pushed some of the darks around the wooden feature a little bit more so that it stood out, being that that's the focal area of the painting, but also trying not to distract too much from the rest of the painting. I wanted it to be one of those things where you notice it after the fact. Oh, that's a nice pond painting. Oh, look, there's a bridge. Hey, that's Monet's pond. So you can play with things like that people don't really notice at first right away. What I'm doing here now is I'm putting in some of the features of the wisteria as they sort of showcased around the bridge. And then I'm also taking some of the foliage of the trees and giving the reflections a little bit more information down in the water. And then once I get those reflections in place and they're vertically painted, I'll come over the top and go horizontally with just a soft green color to indicate that there are clumps of lily pads on the surface of the water, and it creates that illusion. And I stopped showing the palette so much in the latter half of this video because the color mixing is all the same. The colors, I'm just using the colors that I had used throughout the initial stages when I did show the palette. So it's, a series of cadmium, yellows, and blues. I will say learning to mix colors is like learning a recipe. You learn that, 1 teaspoon of this with 1 cup of that, or a tablespoon of this and 1.5 tablespoons of that gives you a certain flavor. And it's the same thing with mixing colors. You can practice color wheels and charts and graphs, and I don't have any problem with those, but I think that you learn best by keeping your palette limited and just getting out there and doing it and observing. So as I move forward now in the lower portions of this painting and throughout, I'm going to be concentrating on some of these details and these efforts to create more of the information that really draws the viewer in. So again, some of the sun was just kissing the top of that tree in the background a little bit more. I'm going to let that just sort of cascade its way down. And then I'll focus on some of the willow branches and things that frame in this painting just a little bit more. Now this passage of the painting, I am just working on isolating and defining the forms of the trees and foliage a little bit more. So I'm going to be quiet and just let you watch here for a bit as you see what I'm doing here to sculpt out the trees. One thing I want to point out about painting actually it's these willow branches, but it's more of a principle of when you have a passage of anything and the background around it is light, that object, even if that object is uniform in color and value, you still have to paint what has a light background, you have to paint it darker, and what has a dark background, you have to paint it lighter. As you can see, when I'm handling these willow branches and willow leaves here, I've purposely painted where it is the blue background, I painted that darker, and then where it's the dark green background, I painted that a lighter, more sagey green, so that it does show up, but it also has that interesting movement of light. Once you start seeing that feature in nature, you're going to see this interesting phenomenon everywhere you look. I noticed it first when I was observing power lines. If you watch a power line with the light background, it looks black, it's silhouetted black. If you watch it when it has a dark background, all of a sudden it looks white. And so you can just make sure to observe that in nature when you're working on your painting. And I'm going to work on this clump of grasses down here in the foreground. And I want to be very careful in working on this so that I don't just start putting in 1,000 stripes. And you want to squint your eye, even at a photo, squint down and see where the masses of color are. I can always add the stripes and streaks later, but in the beginning stages of this, you just want to mass in where you see some darker masses and where you see some lighter masses. This is a common aspect in most landscape paintings. We often have clumps of grass that are closer to the viewer, so I definitely wanted to make sure that this was in this video because it's instrumental in learning how to do this. And I love the contrast of the different surfaces here. So we've got the water that has sort of that silky movement on the surface behind it, the dark value of the olive green reflected trees, and then this scratchy, grassy, vertical passage right in the front. So I'm just massing in sort of, I started with the darks, then I worked to a middle tone, and now I'm putting in the highlights. I will then put in the flowers, and at the very end, scratch in some of those more elegant, longer weeds and grasses. And I'm putting in some more of the detail on the flowers before I get further into this pile of grasses because I'm going to be layering over the top of them. So it's important that those are where I need them to be without being distracting. I think the tendency with painting flowers is to, because we love them, we paint them really bright and strong and vibrant, but you have to take them into context of the painting. If I wanted the viewer to focus on this clump of weeds and grasses, that I would make them a focal point. But since I want the viewer to focus on the bridge and deeper into the painting, all that they are doing is serving to support the focal area. They can help point the viewer back that way or just to help sort of frame in the lower portion of the painting, but they cannot be distracting. I wouldn't want to put bright yellows and reds and you know, fuchsias and things down in the corner here because that would draw the eye down here. Even if they were there in real life, I have to make that conscious decision to just put in some of these neutral, soft purple flowers that we recognize as flowers. They're there. but they're not calling for our attention. They're continuing us on in our journey throughout the painting. Now I'm just suggesting some more of the lighter colored grasses, and just as the light's hitting them, I have a very thinned down mixture on a longer detailed brush that's very thin. And at the end of these grasses, I'm giving them a little tuft, sort of like a wheat or sort of whatever's green at the end of the grass. It gives it a nice sense of weight too as it's blowing in the wind. And finally, onto these lily pads, what we've been waiting for. Now be very careful if you do paint lily pads to make sure that they maintain that horizontal effect. We know that they're circles, and so we understand that a lily pad is a circle, and oftentimes I see them painted as such. You have to understand that they are an ellipsis, that they turn, and further back they go, the more horizontal oval they become. So these are, we're looking more down on them, so they can be a little bit more circular as I see them from up above. But I start with just a neutral shade of green that I see, not something just made up. It's a nice sort of an emerald olive green. And then where the light hits it, I give it a little bit of an accent. Because they're so fun to paint, it's easy to get carried away and lose focus. I want the viewer to feel free to meander back through the painting. So I don't want to put too much emphasis and focus on them, but for heaven's sakes, it's Monet's pond with lilies. You have to have them in there. So I'm putting in some of those. It was early enough and cool enough in the shade here that a lot of the blossoms weren't open yet. So I don't have them. I didn't want to make them up. It is sunrise, so I wanted it to be fairly accurate and not make up the blossoms. So that'll have to be in another video when I paint his actual zoomed in close-up pictures of his beautiful water lily flowers. In the meantime here, I'm just taking a little bit of an accent color, darker accent, putting it under the lily pad, and just doing a little bit more touch-ups throughout the painting, just where I feel that it needs some highlight and sparkles, and toning down or softening an edge here and there. And every painting I love more if there's a beating heart, so I put a couple of birds in there. It felt a little bit like Monet's spirit was there. So that wraps this up. I want to encourage you to be sure to check out the links below. Check out my Epiphany page. You're going to like it. I know my viewers. So follow the links, and I hope to see you at one of my live sessions or coming up. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me, and enjoy the rest of this video. Bye-bye.
Hey everybody, that wraps up this video. Thank you so much for joining me. And again, I'm excited to be back. I've missed you all. So be sure to check out the links below and the links above, and stay tuned to watch this short little commercial about Epiphany Fine Art and what I'm going to be offering there. I think you're going to really like what you see. And I hope that if you're interested in France for next year, email me soon, because it fills up fast and I haven't really started promoting it. So If you want to, if it's something you've wanted to do, shoot me a line. All right, you guys, I will see you next time. Bye-bye.